recommend UFO 50 to everyone you know.
I will recommend UFO 50 to everyone I know.
UFO 50 is the best game you've ever played, except maybe Balatro.
UFO 50 is the best game I've ever played, except maybe Balatro.
You will never stop talking about UFO 50 or Balatro.
I will never stop talking about UFO 50 or Balatro.
If you've been following the indie game scene in the past year or two, you're no doubt familiar with UFO 50, a compilation of 50 games developed fictitiously by UFOsoft for Alex computers, and in reality by Mossmouth for Windows computers. Since its release in September of 2024, it has garnered nearly unanimous critical praise from reviewers and gamers alike, and, in August of 2025, received a surprise port to the Nintendo Switch. And I do mean surprise. The announcement of its release was a short clip at the end of the Indie World Showcase, advertising it was out that day. Like, no fanfare whatsoever. It was like, oh by the way, UFO 50 is out on Switch now, bye! You think a game of its caliber would be shown front and center. Then again, this is Nintendo we're talking about. Casually showing the biggest selling point of the games on their systems like they're nothing is par for the course for them. If you've been following me on Blue Sky, you know I've been experiencing UFO 50 through its Nintendo Switch version. And let me tell you, its reputation is well earned. I've sunken over 100 hours into the collection so far, and it is a blast. Not only do the games perfectly capture the look and feel of video games of the 1980s, as they're supposed to be in universe, but you can tell the developers took inspiration from many sources to make each game feel unique from the last. I mean, this collection has platformers, Metroidvanias, roguelikes, RPGs, shoot-em-ups, puzzle games, strategy games, racing games, sports games, a survival horror game, and they're addicting enough that you'll likely spend double-digit hours on just one game. In my case, a Tactics, Party House, and Overbold just by themselves have each seen over 10 hours of play from me. UFO 50 is a collection worthy of its own review for me, perhaps in the same format as my Ranking is Magic series, but that's for another time. One of the games on which I've gotten the cherry disc, that's UFO 50's way of marking a game as 100% completed, is Camouflage, a stealth puzzle game featuring chameleon avoiding predators. It's a short game, only 15 levels long, but a fun one to figure out. There is a part of me, though, that wishes it lasted over 100 levels, much like a game I find to play similar to it, Roll Away. What? You've never heard of Roll Away? The puzzle platformer released by Psygnosis for the PlayStation in 1998? Also known as Kula World in Europe and Kula Quest in Japan? Oh, right! It's one of those more obscure games. One of those Arcade-ological discoveries. Now I know what you're thinking. What is this weird Japanese game you're showing to us? To which I say, I don't know what weird Japanese game you're talking about, because Roll Away comes from Sweden. Yes, the same country that gave us IKEA, the Skarsgård family, those candy fish full of Red 40, and the most Eurovision winning songs of any country, tied with Ireland, also gave us this weird-ass oddity of the PlayStation library. Specifically, Roll Away was developed by Game Design Sweden AB, also known as Playcom, a small studio founded in 1995, and this would unfortunately be the only console game they ever made. Shortly after the game's release, they merged with NetBaby World, an early browser game company that specialized in Shockwave games. For those of you under 25, Shockwave was basically the Flash of the 90s and early 2000s internet. But I digress. This second life for the company doesn't appear to have been very successful though, as NetBaby World went defunct in 2003. And that's it. That's the only information I could find on Game Design Sweden AB, and I searched many websites to get information on them. Wikipedia, Giant Bomb, Moby Games, Cutting Room Floor, and none of them say anything more about the company than what I just told you. They're unfortunately no more than a footnote in the history of the video game medium, and that's probably a stretch, even if we were to narrow things down to the 5th generation. However, Roll Away's publisher, the Liverpool-based Psygnosis, actually does have quite a footprint. Aside from having a kick-ass logo designed by Roger Dean, best known for his work for the prog rock bands Yes and Asia, Psygnosis was and is best known for the games they published for Amiga computers, most notably Reflection's Shadow of the Beast, acclaimed for its heavy use of parallax scrolling, and DMA Design's Lemmings, acclaimed for posing a challenge as high and impressive as its sprite count. Lemmings in particular would see ports to many platforms, and I do mean many platforms, in its time. The Super Nintendo version being how most people are probably familiar with the game, and the Mega Drive version being how I'm most familiar. I even snagged a few world records on Mega Drive Lemmings back when I briefly speedran the game back in 2020. And by the way, just to clarify, yes, I am a world record holding speedrunner. Well, a former one anyway. If you hear a Lemmings speedrunner use terms like double dig and 18 blockerless, I'm the one that gave those terms their names. Anyway, Cyanosis' success on the Amiga was quickly noticed by Sony, who, at the time, was retooling their failed collaboration with Nintendo into its own system, and was scouting developers and publishers to get on board their entry to the console market. But Sony didn't merely get Cyanosis on board, they bought the whole damn company for an estimated £20 million, a decision that would prove beneficial for both parties. Cyanosis, by the loose terms of the partnership, was allowed to develop and publish for the rival systems, while Sony would be provided both with killer apps such as Wipeout and Colony Wars, and with development kits that were easier and more efficient to use than what they provided to their Japanese talent. One of the games Cyanosis would publish for North America was a bizarre puzzle platformer that Sony took on publishing duties themselves for the European and Japanese markets. To European Spielara, it was known as Kula World. To Japanese Gima, it was known as Kula Quest. And to North American gamers, the game would be known as Roll Away. Note on the title, apparently the game's creator, Johannes Söderqvist, wanted it to be called Kula Quest in both its Japanese and North American releases. However, he was worried he would run into trademark issues with a British rock band called Kula Shaker, who I personally had never heard of before researching for this video, and their only chart performance in America was on the alternative and rock charts. They're not even one-hit wonders by the Billboard Top 40 definition. But apparently they're well known enough to worry about trademark issues with, so for the game's release in North America, it was titled Roll Away. Personally, I don't mind the name change. In fact, I actually think Roll Away does a better job explaining what the game is to English speakers. Kula is the Swedish word for ball, which, unless you're one of the estimated 11 million people in the world who actually speak Swedish, or you looked up what Kula World means, you almost certainly wouldn't know. Roll Away explains that the game is about rolling a ball through a gravity-defying maze. Whenever I find an opportunity to talk about this game, I often refer to it as Roll Away / Kula World. Roll Away because that's the title my region knows the game by, and Kula World because that's its original title. For the sake of simplicity, however, I'm going to be referring to the game as Roll Away for the rest of this video, and only bring up the Kula World and Kula Quest names when I talk about aspects of those versions specifically. So usually, the first thing I talk about specifically regarding the games I cover on this series is the story of the game. The story written especially gives stakes to the game's story. Here's the thing about Roll Away.
Just say the thing!
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Roll Away does not have a story. And I mean that in the most literal way. There is no story to this game. Not told in a cutscene that most people skip, not a brief paragraph in the manual explaining the backstory behind the game's stakes, nothing. The first thing you see after the Cyanosis logo is the camera spinning around the game's first level, and the manual only talks about how to play the game. This is as purely a video game as video games get, relying only on the execution of its gameplay through its mechanics and challenge.
Actually, the Kula Quest release added FMV cutscenes to give the game a story.
Oh hey, good point, Margot! They don't explain much either. Apparently the game is set in a dream and that's it. That's all the added cutscenes give us. So don't go into this game expecting a deep story, or indeed any story at all. If you aren't coming in to Roll Away for the gameplay, or at the very least the dreamlike, substance-inspired atmosphere we'll get into in a moment, you're out of luck.
But of course, I'd be here for the substance-inspired atmosphere. Third generation rock royalty, remember?
Well then I guess you'd like this game just fine, if you can put up with its difficulty level. But more on that later. Your scene's over, go! Roll Away can be best described as a puzzle platformer. You control a beach ball in a series of gravity-defying mazes, collecting various treasures on the way to the exit, the most important of which are the keys, which must be collected to access the next level. Other collectibles include coins and gems, which add to the player's score for the level, hourglasses, which can either gain or lose the player time on the level depending on when they're collected, pills, red and yellow temporarily slowing the ball down, and blue and magenta causing it to bounce until it pops or reaches the exit, and fruit, one of which can be found on each level in the form of an apple, watermelon, pumpkin, banana bunch, or strawberry, and upon completion of the level with all 5 collected, take the player to a bonus level, where the player must light up every cube by traveling upon them. For the record, the fruit is what reminds me of the UFO 50 game I brought up earlier. However, unlike in Camouflage where collecting the fruit was required for the cherry disc, the fruit in this game is merely an added challenge. The most they give is the opportunity for the extra points the bonus level offers. You may have noticed some of the collectibles I described have detrimental effects to the ball. Well, that difficulty level I alluded to a minute ago is no joke, and those collectibles are just one of many ways this game can be brutally difficult. Another way are the traps lying about to destroy the ball, or send it careening off the map. Spikes are out to pop the ball, lasers to burn it, fire tiles to melt it, abstractly shaped enemies to capture it, and trampolines, ice tiles, crumbling platforms, and strategically placed holes to send the ball falling. All as a timer is ticking, ready to screw the player over if an hourglass isn't picked up in time or gets picked up too early. And of course, I think it goes without saying that one hit is all it takes before the level must be started over from the beginning. And depending on how far you get in, being sent back can be incredibly punishing. This game doesn't have lives in the traditional sense, but rather, something arguably more sinister. You might have noticed in the footage I've shown so far, that this game has 2 score counters, a gold number for your score on the current level, and a silver number for your total score across all the levels. However, unlike most games where the score is tracked basically to give the player bragging rights, in Rollaway, that score is your life counter. Fail the level, and your would-be score for the level is subtracted from the total, on top of a base penalty that gets steeper the further into the game you get. Lose all your points, and it's a game over, sending you back to your last save point. Said save points come up every 5 levels, which conveniently, on an all-fruits run of the game, is after every bonus level. Aside from the main arcade mode, there is also a time trial mode. Here, of course, it is time that is tracked instead of score, with lives essentially being infinite, bonus levels being removed, and fruits now only taking time off the timer. The timer works like golf scoring here, in that the player must aim to finish the level with the timer as far below 0 as possible, with checkpoints coming up every 15 levels, or one full set of levels following a visual theme. A gold timer reading positive for any individual level does not itself disqualify the player. However, the silver timer, here logging for the set instead of the entire game, must read 0 or below by the checkpoint to move on to the next set. The main campaign of Rollaway in both arcade and time trial mode has 10 sets, for a total of 150 levels. However, an additional 20 levels are unlocked at the completion of the arcade mode, making for 170 levels overall, not counting bonus stages. Score in the arcade mode is tracked via a bar graph that can be viewed on the player's save file, which I honestly think is a really cool addition. I've never seen anything like it in any other game. Closest I've seen are graphs made by speedrunners tracking a game's world record time. Brag! And those aren't official graphs, of course. Well, they're official speedrun graphs, not official graphs used by the game itself. But what I'm trying to say is, you don't usually see games track score in an in-depth manner like this. And it's cool that the devs thought to include a way for the player to see how well they're performing. Or in my case, how badly! I suck at this game. I guess it is fitting, though, that one of the few games in which score actually matters for more than just bragging rights would work in such a unique feature like this. Aside from these single-player options, Rollaway can also be played as a 2-player game, with a time trial mode, here being to a competition of who can beat the level fastest, and a copycat mode, which is basically this game's take on Simon. As will probably be tradition for the series, I did not get to test these 2-player modes out. To be fair, however, the game is probably best enjoyed by one person, experiencing the high difficulty and trippy visuals for themselves. Speaking of which... a game like Rollaway could have only come out in the 5th generation of gaming, as its visual presentation is very of that time. You see, the late 1990s were an awkward time for video games, and for that matter, computer graphics as a whole. We all know that the 5th generation was the first to push polygons on home consoles, but the art of CGI as a whole was in a transitional period as well, where it had evolved past the simple shapes and flat shading the 1980s were and are known for, to almost realistic looking characters and effects, complete with textures such as fur and scales, and effects like clouds and fire. However, note that I did say almost. There was still an uncanniness to computer animation that kept it looking completely like real life. And the stuff that aimed to have more of a cartoony or abstract look and feel to it has always held up better than the stuff that made a more genuine attempt to look more realistic. Just compare the toys in Toy Story to the humans and see what I mean. Roll Away goes more simplistic and abstract with its visuals, attempting more to pull off an atmosphere than push the hardware. What you'll see during the game basically amounts to texture map cubes for the platforms, a texture map sphere for the ball, a skybox, and the various collectibles and traps scattered about. And with this small amount of assets, the game manages to make great use of them, creating, as I said earlier, 170 levels out of said assets, and maintaining its dreamlike atmosphere across all of them. The skyboxes in the main levels depict vast landscapes such as deserts, hills, and mountains that seem to go on forever, and the death planes are placed far outside the map to help sell the feeling of falling through an endless void. Many of the traps and collectibles don't have much of any texture mapping on them, similar to abstract figures one may see in a dream. But on the bonus levels, things go full-on psychedelia with warping colors and cycling palettes. Of course, like all good puzzle games, you know the devs had to work in a way to prevent the player from exploiting the pause feature to solve the mazes. And Roll Away's uniqueness even extends to the pause screen. Remember how I said earlier that the title screen shows the camera spinning around the first level? Well, that's what you see when you pause the game. The camera spinning around the current level. It's kind of devious, really. You still see the level, but it disorients you, making it hard to plan out your next move. It's like being blindfolded and spun around before pinning the tail on the donkey, except as an anti-cheating measure in a substance trip of a video game. Roll Away's visual presentation is pretty simple even for 1998, but that simplicity works in its favor. Anything more than what little it works with would have just felt frivolous, and I'd argue that its abstract style has helped the game hold up better visually than many of its contemporaries, particularly the ones that try to look as realistic as possible. I also think that, if the game was any more visually complex, that it'd have trouble running at 60 frames a second. Yeah, that's right. The frame rate snobs of today don't realize how hard a full 60 FPS was to pull off with polygons back in the 5th generation. 2D games like Rayman and Psygnosis' own Adventures of Lomax were pretty easy to pull off at that frame rate, but polygonal games were another story. Even the Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon games, two franchises that I feel have some of the best staged 3D graphics on the PlayStation, only run at 30. Roll Away, on the other hand, is optimized enough that it runs at a full 60. I don't usually care about frame rates in my games as long as they run well enough to play, but with a game as visually simple and often fast-paced as Roll Away, I'm sure it'd still be a fun game even at 30, but it would definitely feel lacking, like Van Halen being led by Sammy Hagar instead of David Lee Roth. So the fact that the devs got the game running at that full frame rate makes it feel truly immersive. Roll Away is a simple-looking game, there's no way around saying it, but in its simplicity, it found a distinctive style that fits it perfectly. The music of Roll Away was composed by an electronica group called Twice a Man. Much like with Kula Shaker, I'd never heard of them before playing this game, and I couldn't find any information on how popular or not they are in their and the game's native Sweden. Apparently though, early in their career, they went by the name Cosmic Overdose, which also functions as a pretty good descriptor for the soundtrack they composed for this game. As well as the game itself, but I digress. I have not much to say about the soundtrack to Roll Away, other than it sounds very much like how the game itself looks. It strikes a balance between the electronic and the symphonic, the electronic aspect capturing the game's dreamlike tone, and the symphonic aspect capturing the feeling of being high up in the sky of a vast landscape. And you get a taste of it right from the title screen, the theme of which also serves as the set of the Egyptian-themed levels that open the game. Let's take a listen to it, and a few of the game's other tracks, and you be the judge of whether it feels like the soundtrack of your dreams or your nightmares. Of course, considering the game's difficulty, the latter may be what you're looking for, or perhaps something in between the two. Whether a dream, nightmare, or something in between though, I'm sure we can all agree that it does indeed sound like a cosmic overdose. As for me, if the rest of Twice a Man's music sounds like this, then I'm interested in checking them out. Oh cool, they're still performing, that's cool. Maybe I'll check this new album out. Ah, blort. I guess I'm sticking to their earlier work then. As I've been saying throughout this video, Roll Away is a very difficult game, possibly among the hardest on the PlayStation. But as difficult as it is, most of it is a fair challenge. It's just a matter of finding the solution, memorizing and making the right maneuvers to get to the exit, ideally with the fruit and some treasure collected along the way. And even in the late game, I managed to find a few easier levels as breathers between the more complicated ones. Also, as a quality of life touch, the game also gives you the ability to look up and down, done with the right shoulder buttons, to help see where you're going when you jump from a height. It's a case of high difficulty done right, challenging but not unforgiving, with failure usually stemming from the player's own skill issue. Of course though, I did use the words most and usually, because as well designed as the game is, and as innovative as its idea is, it's not perfect. Sometimes, particularly by jumping, the ball gets misaligned, and ends up on the edge of the next cube over, rather than dead center like it's supposed to. This isn't an issue for most of the game, but it was on level 109. Goddamn level 109, how it fills me with the urge to defecate! I probably lost on this one level more than on any other in the game. It's pretty simple in design, most of the action takes place on a single row of cubes. The challenge here comes from how you have to do everything under the effects of the blue and magenta pill, the one that causes you to bounce, on switches that control the lasers running through the row. So not only do you have to time your bounces so that certain lasers aren't running where you need to go, you also have to put up with potentially run-killing misalignment jank that can get a ball popped, even if the jump was otherwise done properly. It's one shit level out of over 100 good ones, but it's still a shit level, an inconsistent mess that shouldn't have made it past playtesting. Then again, I have seen speedrunners use the misalignment to their advantage, particularly on stage 136 where it's quite easy to exploit, so maybe it's a mixed blessing? Also, not that this is a problem per se, but I also found it surprising that the game has no level editor. A puzzle game as simple as this, with mechanics so easy to understand, you'd think that this would be a game that had such a feature. Roll Away does have a pretty big cult following, but I think the game could have reached many more players, became a best-selling title on the PlayStation if it had such a feature. But I guess it wasn't on the devs' minds. Aside from these few nitpicks though, I still very much recommend Roll Away. Or Kula World or Kula Quest depending on what region of the world you're from. That UFO 50 game Camouflage I've compared this game multiple times to, both in this video and on social media, is fictitiously a game from 1985. And Roll Away feels like a game from that era, with the graphical presentation of the late 1990s. It's simple and challenging gameplay like 1985, with the electronic sound and CGI-soaked visual presentation of 1998. If that sounds like something up your alley, then you'll love this game. As for collectors, if you're going after the North American release as Roll Away or the Japanese release as Kula Quest, you're in luck, because both go for quite manageable prices, with listings going for the 20s USD, usually the low 30s at the highest, just over a dime per level. Unfortunately for PAL region collectors, the game's original release as Kula World is quite difficult to come by. The release has apparently been going for triple digits for many years now, and as of December of 2025, that hasn't changed. Nowadays, the price usually averages around 150 USD, and the average has gone for as high as 170. So best not waiting for the price to go down if it's this specific version you're after. Roll Away may have been the only console release from Game Design Sweden AB, but Johannes Söderqvist has gone on to better things in the video game industry. He went on to join DICE, another Swedish developer, and served as art director on another cult favorite, the first-person platformer Mirror's Edge. I'll admit I've not played Mirror's Edge myself. I've always been a Nintendo person, and the game never came to the Nintendo platforms. But I've heard great things about it, and from the gameplay footage I've seen, it looks pretty cool. Between it and Roll Away, I can tell Söderqvist has a design philosophy of using minimalism to create an atmosphere, and puts more focus on said atmosphere than pushing the hardware. Less is more, as they often say, and in some cases, that more is nearly 200 levels. Ideally paid one per dime. And not per dollar.
You know, it's even better than a dime per level. 50 cents per game, like with UFO 50. Haven't played anything like it since Balatro.
You never shut up about those games.
This video is not sponsored by anyone, by the way. Adler and I just really like UFO 50. And Balatro. And, they like Roll Away. / Kula World. Like camouflage!
And now it is time for Adler to fly off. Until next time, take care, stay safe, be good to each other, reject the billionaire's attempts to bring the world down, and have a good one. If you would like to support this channel on a monetary level, then drop a donation at ko-fi.com/adlerpog. Monthly donors will get access to exclusive perks, such as donation credits in my videos and early access to completed OTOG chapters. Vielen Dank!